Hello, hello. All. Yes, the second course. Yes, in the first course, we determined the assumptions about multiplicities and common equal x to deal with the concrete. The term that always comes up in connection with the concrete is the encounter, whatever it may be. We have first of all linked the concrete with the fiction, while admitting that is not the only way to find the concrete. For the concrete in philosophy, we refer to Bertrand Russell, Katerina Kolosova, and François Laruelle. We have also seen that to find the concrete from the philosophy, it was necessary to be able to decompose it between its elements, postulating a point of exteriority. This is what I will develop in this introduction. Decomposition and compatibility. The idea of decomposition was introduced by Henri Poincaré in the book The Fundament of Geometry, who was first published in English and translated in French after the death of Poincaré. The problem of Poincaré in this book was the following. In the sensitive space, espace sensible, we can make a movement, come back to the first place, turn, and put ourselves back to the initial stage. It is for him the structure of the concept of group in mathematics. Very, very nearly. And feel ourselves in a three-dimensional space. Poincaré decomposes this set of movement in a way that is compatible with geometry. Plus a small reminder, very nearly. En français, à très peu près. À très peu près. Poincaré builds at the same time an ordered generic space. First, the spirit with his faculty of repeating, and after arithmetic, analysis, geometry, mechanics, theoretical physics, and experimental physics, and after experiment with the truth. And he always declines the discipline in the same order. No more in Dernière Pensée, but Dernière Pensée was not published by him, it was after his death. And Poincaré can move from one discipline to another by decomposition. Geometry and mechanics are very similar, but geometry is conventional, whereas the laws of mechanics are to be subjected to experience, but not its principles, only the laws. Poincaré thus set up a new type of invention in science. For example, instead of an analytical mechanics, one could invent an algebraic mechanics, as he proposed, which we now is useful for robots. He can work on arithmetic groups and immediately transfer his results to the stability of the solar system. But there is a condition, the compatibility, see Leibniz, and hypercompatibility if we take into account the models, not only theories. Poincaré said, wrote in the academic review, compte rendu de l'Académie des sciences, each year his works, so we can now very nearly the mode of invention. So I propose to continue the abductive jump we made the previous course between the whole of the possible trajectories between the philosophies and the multiplicity of right of the philosophies to decompose philosophy. Decomposition can allow us to move from one philosophy to another. Philosophy can be described by a diagram with a line which can vary in thickness. The thickness is not the same for Plato and Nietzsche, for example, and a spring which unites what is separate and allows to change scale. There is the a priori, there is the concept, there is the empirical, and there is a link between them, which is neither empirical nor conceptual, the transcendental. We can then build new relationships between concepts and empirics of different philosophies. Isolate a concept and put it in relation with knowledge of philosophies that do not use this concept much. This new relationship can give rise to fictions. For the fiction number one, the term encounter allows to put in unexpected relations the concept and the assertion of the philosophy. We have C, je vais mettre ici, we can combine a concept with knowledge and knowledges. Why and knowledges? Because there is no commutativity, and for the introduction of an undetermined discipline, we have to assure the compatibility. An example, GMO fish. It's a bizarre object, but we have a project in the Research National Agency for 4 years to examine the problem posed by GMO fish with Muriel Mombrini-Doudet. Alors, if we treat the GMO fish as a fish plus a genetic manipulation, we reach a dead end. We know this now from 50 years ago. It's assumed to be the product of molecular biology. This is the first catastrophe. And then there is a cascade of disciplines depending on the obstacles or problems encountered. Chemistry, law, the fish international international industry, knowledge of plants GMO, and then at the end, epistemology and ethics. And ethics is deturned, is now to said to us we can or we cannot have GMO fish pour le repas. The result is that finally our object is a product that is presented to consumers who are divided either for or against, with always the same arguments for more than 50 years, whereas the definitions of the gene have changed. We have proposed another method. All disciplines are put at the beginning and have the same weight. We do not say that GMO is a product of molecular biology. The GMO fish becomes an X, whose properties are unexpectedly distributed among the discipline involved. Each discipline has its knowledge about the object, at least partially. Epistemology must add the models to the classical epistemology, but it also had to build its non-knowledge by listening to the representatives of the other disciplines. Non-knowledge is very important to interdisciplinarity. This non-knowledge makes us rewrite our own knowledge and at the same time builds the collective intimacy between the representatives of the disciplines. The GMO fish is no longer a product, and at each stage we can make choices. GMO fish is as an impossible object for the classical disciplines, and knowledge and non-knowledge or disciplines under a discipline, for example, epistemology, ethics, etc. We can then study whether the GMO detection methods for plants can be used for animals. The chemist tells us, unfortunately not. It was Yves Berthaud who is named in France the king of GMO. He can distinguish immediately a tomato GMO or tomato. And for fish, he said it's impossible. We can no longer synthesize all the knowledge. We need another compass. Integrative objects, no synthesis. What have we for this? An X, object partially unknown, a variety of disciplines with diverse modes of proof or justification. We have to construct a device capable at the same time of making generic all the disciplinary elements and of being able not only to combine them in a new ways, but especially to invent new languages and new metaphors, new dimensions to study our object. This means the matrix. The idea of matrix was created in Nottingham University by biologists to evaluate pain in animal experiments. It is always a collective exercise, turning our opinions into positions. Quite independently matrix was introduced by non-standard philosophy to now philosophy, we need another discipline which allows a modeling of philosophy that is not a self-modeling. I will now propose a matrix to approach the concrete from the idea of encounter. The matrix is not a table. It's enriched with dimensions by the intervention of disciplines representative and their experiences. When well conducted, it can be seen as a sphere on which orientations will be drawn, vectors for thought. So I made a matrix. Normally, we had to make the matrix collectively. But it is an example to reach a multiplicity of interpretations. Tony, can you put the matrix on the screen, please? It's possible?
Yeah, I can. 1 second. Just opening the document. Yes.
Yes. It's possible to have all to. The matrix is a procedure to maintain the generic space. The matrix allows for the articulation of different disciplines and experience by addressing heterogeneities. So I construct this matrix with the idea of encounter for the concrete. I put different discipline and experiences: philosophy, art, sciences, mathematics, geography, human, animal. For example, we can have more partenaires. And in abscisse, object, text, symmetrical relationship, weight, circulation, empiric, concrete. But we can add other. For philosophy, the object, for me, is divided into the spirit, the structure of the spirit, and the sensible. In the text, philosophy as a factum. The text, the world, the universe, the life, etc. Symmetrical relationship. You saw the previous in the fiction by Russell. Alors, one of possible relation. The weight for philosophy, all disciplines, all philosophy have the same weight. For the circulation, philosophy by the tradition and the history, empiric, in correlation with the a prioris of each philosophy. It is a correlation of empiric and philosophy. Concrete, non-correlation between concrete and philosophy. So object, text, symmetrical, weight, circulation, empiric, concrete. I take these on the fiction. For art, object is oscillations. Text, commentary. Symmetrical relationship, exchange between sensible and material. Weight, the judge, Circulation, media. Empirique, I do not, it's possible to. Concrete, material, method. For science, the objective is obscure reality. One admit reality for the experience and the theories, it's obscure. The text, diagrams, as a question. Symmetrical relationship, possible with experimental devices. Weight, fluxes between disciplines. Circulation by the generic process. Empiric, all the material for an experience. And concrete, the result was not expected. Mathematics. Object is not just ink. It's an idea of Frege. Text, equation, diagram. Symmetrical relationship, classes. Weight, homogenization of reality. Circulation from one structure to another, the categories and topoi. Empiric, ink. Mathematic, the result that we see but do not believe in. Geography, earth, cartography, geodesic. Piece of the compass. One fields and oceans. Barrier, relationship, etc., etc. For human, human is in front or next to an object. The text is an ordinary biography. Ordinary because it is an order between real and human as a subject in the world. Symmetrical is fraternity, weight, equality, circulation, liberty, empiric world, concrete, universe in the world. We saw this in the conference before the either field for philosophy. An animal, object, external memory, text, return point, symmetrical cooperation, weight, force, circulation, speed, empiric, the environment, concrete, relationship with the milieu, etc. Bon, they are hypotheses. I do not know, these are the solution of the combination. But it is interesting when we are a lot of persons of different disciplines to write the matrix. We saw that where is the relationship between the disciplines? His diagram, what does the human philosopher who exercise his freedom do? He distances himself from tradition while keeping it with him. It can then relate to other disciplines. The philosopher can create, and the suit after he can create his diagram, the line and the spring, and pass from particular philosophy to the right multiplicity of philosophies. Passage from the multiplicity of trajectories to the multiplicity of heights. This removes the smugness and the strife between philosophies. It supposes a non-classical logic as by Jean-Yves Béziaux and Newton da Costa. We can also articulate philosophy were considered as opposites. For example, Bergson and Russell. Relationship alone or relationship with term. Russell, relationship with term, relation and term, Bergson only relationship. And we can combine the two. Simondon and Russell, for example. So this is a structure to transform practice of philosophy. This matrix is bad because we are not all to make this, but we can with you make matrices very rich. I think. So I have now a reflection to a question for the first course on the climate change. In France, I will talk only on France. In France, the argument against climate change was that science is an alternation of theory and observation, of theory and experimentations. So models are only recipes who have to disappear with the results. They are not very science devices, the models. So, if we see the reports of the GIEC, je sais pas comment on prononce en anglais. Attendez. Non. Je voudrais. Voilà. Les rapports du GIEC. Voilà. It is only models and simulations. So if we do not accept models as scientific devices and simulation too, it is impossible to admit the climate change. So I will stop here because you can have a question and discussion, and after there is Joevenn and Tony. So now it's yours. Have you some questions or remarks or oppositions? All the courses. Pardon, wait.
I would just wanted to say one thing, which is that the matrix, which we see in 2D format, is not limited to that dimension as well. Like it's n-dimensional, right? We're not like the, obviously, right? What I wanted to just reiterate that the matrix that we provided, which is 2D, is not the only way to provide or to do the matrix. It has more dimensions. Yes?
In a remark, the courses, the matrix, the fictions are put in Google Drive. You have the possibility to consult and to put your fiction and works. Tony has organized this.
I had a question, if that's okay.
Yep.
I think about the matrix, which I guess presents this kind of generic space that gives a certain characterization of the different perspectives of different disciplines. But you also mentioned non-knowledge earlier as well. So I was wondering, within the matrix, what you see the role of non-knowledge as within the matrix or within the generic space, how non-knowledge plays a part, if that makes sense.
Non-knowledge is constructed by iterations and is not explicitly in the matrix, only before and after. When we have a committee, for example, ethics committee, there are persons, there are religious, philosophers, biologists, neurologues, etc., etc., etc. And when one talk, currently we have the habit to compare the parole of the other to our, but it's not the good thing. We have to have the idea that we don't understand immediately who it is talked by another. And with non-knowledge, we have to construct iteratively. We can after rewrite our knowledge in other terms. And we repeat this discipline by disciplines. We make this with the GMO fish. And with this method, it's not possible to treat GMO fish as a fish plus a manipulation. It is an X. It is an X compatible with the method of School of Minds, C cross K under K. And C cross K under K. I will give you an example. For innovation, technological innovation, we can take comment est-ce qu'on dit caoutchouc, Joevenn? Je vais le mettre. Attends, caoutchouc.
Rubber.
Ouais. We can construct a rubber choosing a rubber who can on what we can add a new property as asked by the person who asks the rubber. For example, the rubber have to support high condition of frottement, of frottement. So, School of Mind said we have a new method. This method put the new rubber as an impossible concept. We cannot. And for this impossibility, we decide on several properties of the classical rubber. It can have some caoutchouc, elastic, etc., etc., etc. But we, by hypothesis, supreme the more important property. And so we have to imply other disciplines with other knowledge never used for the fabrication of rubber. It's very interesting. This theory have a name, CK theory, and is created by Armand Actuel and Benoit Weil. Oh, this CK theory is compatible with the idea that the geomorphish is an X. We can put the C is a geomorphish, and we can, after, supreme some properties to be a fish, for example. And so we have to add knowledge from different disciplines. It's a modern invention, very weak. No, not weak, strong, very strong. I have seen for a lot of technological and scientific problems. And for example, in history of science, the imaginary number E was impossible in the algebra of its time. We had to construct an extension of algebra to adapt the imaginary number. It's the same. And École des Mines de Paris create an history of science with this idea that we are new impossible objects and extension of theories, of a theory or of theories. So it is very interesting because we see the extension of knowledge and we see the importance of the concept. And we have two spaces, one without logical property, the concept as a definition is not true or false, no more probable. And the knowledge, the space of knowledge is structured by logic. True, false, axiom of choice, etc. etc. So it's an idea very interesting for the invention. Vraiment, c'est vraiment. And the matrix, so as another, is a device very strong to see the connectionships and the difference between the different disciplines and representative of disciplines and the difference of experiences. So my ensemble is not available because it's mine. Matrix. I assist in Paris in a matrix where scientists of northern countries are here in France and English and Norway and etc. etc. And in one day, one matrix for the pain of an animal if we inject one substance for construct a vaccine. And the partner was very numerous from médecin vétérinaire, consumer, etc., etc., and the values, dignity, equity, etc., etc., etc. And finally, all person is transformed because his opinion is no more a simple opinion, but a position with the other. And so the orientation given by the matrix transform in a intimate, in a collective intimacy. So it's an experience. It's a manner to introduce the experience of the scientists in the science. And it has consequences in practical the science if the ethics is here to transform the trajectories of science. If scientists ask to give some pain to some animal to experts, ethics said, we cannot accept this. So there are in Europa there are a lot of it is a strong frame for this, strong frame, but the ethics committee said to the researcher, we have other solutions to have the result you search. So the ethics committee has the function to propose alternatives in the experience. So it's not a limit to the we cannot, but to search alternatives and to change so indirectly the sciences. It's relatively new. So a matrix shows the positions of different representative and different disciplines on one problem. We can make a matrix on climate change. We can have a matrix on the importance of models in sciences, on models in philosophy. François Laruelle proposed an idea of modeling philosophy who is not an auto-modeling.
Any other questions, comments, additions?
I don't. If there's another question, maybe we can take that. But I do have a potential sort of response, but I don't want to take up all the time for questions.
Just in case people need to unmute the microphone, give a little bit of awkward silence time. All right, it's all you, Zane. You want to respond?
Yeah, not so much a response, but in the way that you were describing non-knowledge, it seemed like it was that there were two components to it, or two ways of using that concept. The first seemed to be a kind of posture or principle for engaging, which is the assumption that the assumption of maybe non-understanding between disciplines, but then non-knowledge also alternatively as a drive as well. So as a drive to creation of new knowledges by acknowledging an impossibility, or the impossibility of a concept that drives you towards new invention. Is it fair to think of non-knowledge as both a kind of posture and way of approaching other disciplines, but also as a drive towards new inventions as well?
I think you're right on the mark in my interpretation of it. Like the idea of the concept of the impossible, even in philosophy, like by posturing for non-knowledge, or the state of the non-art is another way of saying this, right? Can allow us to expand philosophy to go beyond its classical conception. So impossible, you know, is either moved, or we can go beyond it. We don't have to, like, it's no longer a limitation, if that makes sense. Like the idea, the acceptance of non-knowledge is automatically posturing that, like, the impossible is not real, not provable in a sense of, you know, because we accept that it always exists. So yeah, I think, yeah, it is a push for both, but also as an integrated thing, as a mode to integrate it into the, you know, because this is a temporal practice, right? It's an integrated process. Non-knowledge there are times, you know, we can integrate non-knowledge and keep moving forward, I guess.
I guess there is, like, the impossible isn't it can't be a fixed particular impossible. It's more of a general impossible that becomes kind of creative and productive.
Yeah, in this way you can look at Laurel's concept of utopia in a similar manner, and how his position towards thinking utopia and trying to be utopian, or constructing it, right, has to do with kind of by advancing beyond the impossible in that way too, or, you know, yeah.
The text in particular where he discusses that.
He does. I will post it. I mean, he has a book on utopia, but there are like the Marx book also, but there's a shorter text I can provide. I'll post it in the drive. I'll make a note for it.
We can put as impossible object all the concepts. It is a method to find the latent concepts between the principal concepts. It's a method.
Mm-hmm.
It's a method as a translation. If we have for a text multiple translations, and not one best, but multiple, you can construct the multiplicity of latent concepts between the concept to be translated. And this multiplicity, I think it is important. And matrix and integrative object and common egal X, etc. On this idea of multiplicity.
You know, that's kind of interesting for me, because I mean, my example doesn't really touch exactly what you're talking about, but so when I'm working with generative models, a lot of them are, I mean, at the end, you have to translate any given intention into language with syntax for code. But, you know, you learn how to guide these generative models through language. And one of the experiments that I tried was by running it through chain translations. So I would start with an English prompt, and then chain translate it through multiple languages to see where the different, and then it would visualize that concept by displaying an image. And you could see some of the nuanced decisions made during translation, and
Yes,
you end
yes,
up
yes.
in that way of seeing it all in process. You kind of get this idea of the multiplicity of the concept, or even of the fuzziness, the fuzziness or something. I mean, it doesn't get to the core of it, but it's an anecdotal thing for me. We have 1 hour left, so I mean, I would love to continue. We will continue. These conversations are always chained, but I want to open it up for Joevenn to start, because
Yes,
I know he
Joevenn.
prepared for this lecture. This is like his day. So
yeah, so I'm just gonna do 30 minutes so that we can still talk about the fictions that we've written and stuff like that, with the exercises that Tony has prepared. Share screen, 1 second.
You can do it. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, can everybody see my?
Yeah.
I can, yes.
Okay. So my presentation is on the abstract and the concrete. I'm specifically, talking about the philosophical history and aspect of abstraction and the concrete. And since these notions are absolutely rife in the entire history, I'm only gonna talk about a specific section, which is the 17th century. Yeah. So there's a lot, but I'm just gonna talk about the little scope of it. So at a general overview, at the outset, the problem of abstraction in the history of Western philosophy can best be defined as the method of unifying perception and knowledge. In the 17th century, the study of pure mathematics is taken to be the study of the science of abstraction. The debates in scholasticism, the debate surrounding the practice and the nature of abstraction, is taken as both a problem of mathematics and a problem of cognition, but also a problem of mechanics, a problem of physics, a problem of philosophy, and problem of theology. Because you'll see, like, if you read Berkeley, he'll start talking about how, like, he's anti-atheistic, and so it's like them atheists and stuff like that. All of it is a part of it. So in Goclenius's Lexicon Philosophicum, this is just a cool diagram where see the mathematical art with regards to quantity. Here we're talking about perfection and abstraction. And what is the most perfect and the most abstract? Two aspects: number, arithmetical number, and geometrical magnitude. So I'm going to pare down everything, right, and talk specifically about 17th century. So in 17th century scholasticism, the debates concerning the problem of abstraction can be framed or defined as how would our objects of cognition, which starts from the object of our corporeal senses, become objects of our immaterial intellect. A huge debate of that time was, especially like within scholasticism, is that what we know in the intellect must be derived from the senses. And so, as just a correlated problem of this, I just want to, like, as a segue, I just want to talk about skepticism within like the context of this. So skepticism can best be understood as the inability of trusting the abstraction process that comes from our senses, and therefore a generalized inability to trust the abstraction of our sensibilities writ large. And this inability to trust what you or others sense or say is about one's inability to trust the abstraction of knowledge derived from sensibility. This is just a side problem, but it's important to introduce it. So this is just, I'm saying the same, this is a repetition of the previous slide. So I'm going back to the main problem at hand, which is how would our objects of cognition, which starts from the object of our corporeal senses, become objects of our immaterial intellect? So abstraction. So the way that I define this problem of our objects of cognition, objects of corporeal senses, this way of defining abstraction in the 17th century presumes that the range of sensibility and abstraction lies in one, external objects, i.e. objects as external stimuli via corporeal sensibility, species sensibilities. And with these, external stimuli of sensibility, we have sense perception, we can have sense representation, like phantasmata, imagination. And also we have abstraction by the intellect, which here is like a species intelligibilities. We have understanding, the act of judgment, the will as the guide of proper reflection and judgment, reflection as analytics. So in effect, yeah, I'll talk more about this in a bit. Okay, so I'll start with Descartes. For Descartes, our sensory impressions are too complex, too multitudinous for us to attain any conceptual grasp of it. And in a very simple sense, like what we sense is too fuzzy. How do we like unify anything through sense perception? And so in order for us to attain notions of what we sense, we need a form of abstraction, where through abstraction we can pare down, isolate, and formalize what we sense, becoming sense content. So sense impressions are thereby taken by Descartes to be a species of thought. I mean this in the sense that the only way in which we can formalize or give content to all these like fuzzy notions of what we sense, which are too complex, is to make them into a species of thinking, into a species of thought. So this allows Descartes to construe sense impressions as cognitive epistemic items, where sense impressions belong in the same category as explicit thoughts that something is the case. So what I mean by this is that when you have a sense impression and you want to see like, okay, what is this sensibility? You want to like find a way for it to parse it down, to give it like due, to give its content due, right? And so you place it within the category, you make it explicit in as like within a framework of cognitive epistemic items, and then you judge your sense impressions, you judge those contents from the level of the category of thought, the species basically of thought. So Descartes locates our epistemic access to the necessity requisite for causation in the compelled assent to an experienced connection. It is judgment then that are true or false. Because when you encounter, things that are too sensorially complex, there's no what you do. The only way in which you can judge something as being true or false is what Descartes does, is to put it within an epistemic forum, in effect. And so it is these judgments done within that forum. It is a complex activity that involves both the understanding and the will. The understanding and the will are, in this sense, like operations of like analyzing your contents of what is sensorially given and analyzing and determining, etc., etc. And so the understanding presents contents for judgment. The will then assents to or denies those contents. Assent is not part of the content presented by the understanding, but is added by the will. What is complex in our senses in the beginning is taken now to be within the act of clarifying our ideas, so that we can attain clear and distinct ideas of what we can or cannot know. So within the complex activity of thought, with regards to judgment, my assent is, so to speak, constrained or compelled. One cannot but assent to a clear and distinct idea. Such constraints or compelled assent is Descartes' model for knowledge, for universal necessary truths. We thus have, i.e., experience and possess relations of connections in the formal act of determining clear and distinct ideas. And we are compelled to these relations of abstractions through our judgments and our will. Yeah. So abstraction and anti-abstraction in the 17th century. So one aspect of the task of empiricism in the 17th century is to defend the unification of the knowledge of our experience, which for the empiricists cannot be, well, it depends on which empiricist, it depends on which philosopher. But generally, a unification for knowledge of experience, which cannot be abstracted or pared down. So to preserve the due of experience without the procedures of abstraction. And I want to, and to go back to what I referred to earlier with regards to the point of skepticism, it's important. Skepticism is like quite an important like contextual issue within the 17th century with regards to like empiricism. So in 17th century, skepticism lies here as the belief in the existence of a real, while simultaneously doubting that the real can in any way be represented via our sensibilities or in our thought. So for the skeptics, why can't the real be represented through our senses or through our thought? So Berkeley, so I'm going to share a quote by Berkeley in The Principles, which is in the main text. So Berkeley says, this which, if I mistake not, has been shown to be a most groundless and absurd notion is the very root of skepticism. For so long as men thought that real things subsisted without the mind, and that their knowledge was only so far forth real as it was conformable to real things, it follows that they could not be certain that they had any real knowledge at all. For how can it be known that the things which are perceived and conformable to those which are not perceived or exist without the mind. So Berkeley's argument against skepticism, a huge, almost like the main recurring theme if you read the principles, Berkeley's principles, a huge recurring theme is in some way to address the problem of experience especially in light of skepticism, as if like skepticism is this genuine social problem, and the inability to trust their experience is a truly, like a plague or something. And so Berkeley's argument is, if you are a skeptic, how would you attain the real if the real is seemingly designed to always elude you? If you deign to be unable to know the real, then how would you know what even the real is or what the real is not? That skepticism in this aspect simply, it's real easy. What it simply means is that you believe that there's something real, but this something real is something real in terms of reality, in terms of existence. If something is real and it exists, but it's not certain that I can have real knowledge of what is real. And so if that's the case, then Berkeley says, like, is this real just this like phantasm? And if it's just a phantasm, what would you do? Where would you go? So Berkeley's empiricism, this is important, like, yeah, so Berkeley's empiricism as a project of anti-abstraction is meant to be able to unify the knowledge of experience such that we can trust and acquire knowledge via our experiences. The inability to learn how to like generalize or make concrete what our experiences are has such a detrimental like it's incredibly detrimental to society, like in like Berkeley's like conception, in Berkeley's view. And that for him, like, he has to recover a type of like way in which we can unify what we know through our experience as a type of like way to resolve skepticism, to unify the knowledge of, to come to understand that we can know something, to develop a type of knowledge through experience, and therefore not really, not by abstraction. Then we can, so that we can trust and acquire knowledge through our experiences. So again, empiricism is knowledge through experience. And Berkeley's empiricism is in one facet aimed at helping to resolve the problem of skepticism. Really, like, it's social, it's also religious, but everything comes, he also talks about mechanics and stuff like that, and mathematics. So Berkeley's critique against abstract ideas aims to break the scholastic theory of knowledge, which adopts abstraction as the tool for concept formation. And it aims to break the theory of mathematical science that adopts mathematics as the normative model of knowledge, i.e. the mathesis universalis. Mathematical and philosophical knowledge for Berkeley it becomes general without being abstract. So in effect, it's a unification through generalization rather than unification through abstraction. So what do I mean by generalization? Is what I'll talk about in a bit. So what type of generality contra abstraction would this be? So yeah, the generality without abstraction is, a huge part of his critique of Locke. If anybody's interested in the historical aspect of it, where he's against abstract ideas, against like general notions of abstractness. Since like generalization is not abstract but concrete. So here's a passage from the Principles that I've made us. I think it might be in the introduction. I think it might be a little later, but the sentiment is also framed in the introduction, so it's worth talking about this passage here. So Berkeley, in the Principles, he says, as for time, as it is taken in an absolute or abstracted sense for the duration or perseverance of the existence of things. So this sentence, Berkeley is critiquing Locke, the scholastics, ancient Greeks, Parmenides. What the critique is that for Locke, I mean, yeah, the most current like interlocutor for Berkeley is really Locke. So when you say that there's something abstract, when you try to unify through abstraction, and the notion of the absolute is unified through abstraction, there is a timelessness, a type of like temporal sense, duration, or perseverance, where everything, or the existence of things is uniform, such that it's as if it's suspended in time. Like an example of this is Locke's. So Locke thinks that when I use a word, right? Let's say I use a word like orange, and then throughout history, like my friend says orange, and then my friend's friend says orange, and all of a sudden, orange becomes just this abstract generality, as if it's just this like, abstracted, like timeless, like thing in some sense, in this absolute like sense. And so Berkeley is like critiquing this, and then he rejoins. So Berkeley, the next sentence, Berkeley says, this celebrated author, he himself, holds there is an absolute space, which, being unperceivable to sense, remains in itself similar and immovable, and relative space to be the measure thereof, which, being movable and defined by a situation in respect of sensible bodies, is vulgarly taken for immovable space. Place he defines to be that part of space which is occupied by any body, and according as the space is absolute or relative, so also is the place. Absolute motion is said to be the translation of a body from absolute place to absolute place, as relative motion is from one relative place to another. And because the parts of absolute space do not fall under our senses, instead of them, we are obliged to use the sensible measures, i.e. relative space, and so define both place and motion with respect to bodies, which we regard as immovable. But it is said in philosophical matters, so he's rejoining, it's just confusing writing, but he's like, so he's saying, okay, we should talk about relative space as we should be obliged to use our sensible measures. And then he says, like, other people say that in philosophical matters, we must abstract from our senses, since it may be that none of these bodies which seem to be dormant are truly so. And so the same thing which is moved relatively may be really at rest, and likewise one and the same body may be in relative rest. So this is a mechanical thing. And this is a continuation of the same quote. All which ambiguity is to be found in the apparent motions, but not at all in the true or absolute, which should therefore be alone regarded in philosophy. But notwithstanding what has been said, it does not appear to me that there can be any motion other than relative. So that to conceive motion, there must be at least conceived two bodies, whereof the distance or position in regard to each other is varied. Hence, if there was only one body in being, it could not possibly be moved. This seems evident in that the idea I have of motion does necessarily include relation. So this is a huge part of this is mathematical debates, but Berkeley is saying that relative space gives us motion, and motion and it's motion that defines the measure of sensibility. And it's this that we can talk about distance or position without referring to absolute abstraction. So Berkeley has he has a philosophy of mathematics. He's like really trying to figure this out, how to make experience like the forefront of unification. So here, as the place happens to be variously defined, the motion which is related to it varies. A man in a ship may be said to be quiescent, which is the adornment, with relation to the sides of the vessel, and yet move with relation to the land. Or he may move eastward in respect of one and westward in respect of the other. In the common affairs of life, men never go beyond the earth to define the place of any body. And what is quiescent, dormant, in respect of that, is accounted absolutely to be so. But philosophers who have a greater extent of thought and juster notions of the system of things discover even the earth itself to be moved. In order, therefore, to fix their notions, they seem to conceive the corporeal world as finite, and the utmost unmoved walls or shell thereof to be the place whereby they estimate true motions. If we sound our own conceptions, I believe we may find all the absolute motion we can frame an idea of to be at the bottom no other than relative motion thus defined. For as had already been observed, absolute motion exclusive of all external relation is incomprehensible. And to this kind of relative motion, the above mentioned properties, causes, and effects ascribed to absolute motion will, if I mistake not, be found to agree. Berkeley is here talking about how any notion of absolute motion must first be derived from relative motion. And allowing this is like the seed. This is like allows like a type of like basis for us to unify experience without without abstraction. Yeah, there's a lot more to talk about, of course, but if there are questions, we can talk about it in I'm only giving such a short like aspect of this like huge part of history. And I really wanted to talk about Leibniz. Leibniz is an abstraction that differs from Berkeley, from the Cartesians, and from the traditional theory of abstraction from the scholastics. But yeah, I gave the reading. I hope the reading is really Leibniz, like Letters to the Volta, is really interesting. And you can see how different Leibniz is from Berkeley, where Leibniz talks about how substances are like monads and tries to talk about like multiplicity in this incredibly strong way. But there's a link that, yeah, that I hope is like perceivable. That is, yeah. I think I'm just gonna open up to questions. I think it's better that way.
Quick question.
Yeah.
I just like thank you for the great historical overview there as well. But I'm really interested in this this relationship between the motion relation and mathematics, and I'm wondering, like, just in relation to the lecture that Anne-Françoise just gave as well, especially given this sort of n-dimensional matrix that's proposed as a way of modeling sort of relations in a positional way. Like, it seems to me that like, I'm curious what like the relationship between, yes, so there's this like empirical sort of experience of motion and relation. But how do you think that that sort of relates to this like n-dimensional model, which is also weirdly also about sort of relation and motion, because it creates these sort of n-dimensional vectors. I mean, this is like a mathematics that was like maybe not being done at the time, but I'm curious if you yourself have an idea about how those two things might interrelate.
Yeah. Remember, like, what is on top of like Poincaré's list is arithmetic, and then geometry, and then mechanics or something. There is yeah, I wrote like quite a bit about this in my master's, about the in the historical, like in the 20th century, there's the crisis, and then crisis of mathematics, but then it also involves physics and stuff like that. It's just, I don't know how to tell a story. I mean, I have a notion of a story. I haven't like but I don't know how to. The n-dimensional matrix stuff is in some sense, I only know very little parts of it because I don't know what n-dimensional matrix, I think, is Tony's thing. I have no idea how he thinks about it. But the way in which the way in which we can, it's the problem between the problem between the discrete and the continuous. How about that? I think that's one good way to put it. The question of like the question of discretion is tied very much to the notion of experience. How to unify experiences, like, experiences are never like fully formed things. Like, you see parts of it, you see, a face of it. And so if you only have like a face of it, how do you have the faces of all these different things that come together, and for it to even become a house, for instance, or for it to even become whatever object it is? This moves into like can't. But so philosophers, you know, have a solution to that. The construction of a self-modeling, and you know, but this is not how like Anne-Françoise sees it. So the question of like n-dimensional like matrix, okay, how about this? Like the matrix is one way to think about like alterities and modes of like relations of knowledges, right? Like the matrix, you can pass down all of like these different like descriptions of what you think philosophy is, what you yourself are doing. In music, I'm doing XYZ. In mathematics, I'm doing XYZ, or what I think about it. So in the matrix is like retained within the concept. But the notion of experience within this like philosophical narrative that I'm giving is not really about that. It's really about selfhood in some way, in a way that is not entirely like commensurate with like the discourse that I think Anne-Françoise were proposing. But there are important like issues and important like aspects that are there.
Yeah, I guess sorry, that was a difficult question. I guess what I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about these like, so the like motion and your space, how you are relative to a body that's moving, as a sort of like also like sort of like a proto version, like a proto model of this sort of like n-dimensional matrix as well. Like it seemed to me like there's like a kernel of the thing in that formulation. I think that's really interesting. Yeah,
I see what you're saying. I think you're identifying the n-dimensional matrix with what Anne-Françoise talked about, the Poincaré, but I don't think that's the same thing. I think that's why sorry. Yeah, the n-dimensional thing is like I said, it's Tony's thought. I don't know. Tony, you want to say something?
All right, I can try to say. Okay, in the vocabulary of what we're discussing, if I were to try to approach this, the generic space, right, is like the like where the factor exists, like the X where she's talking, but and dimensions, that's another whole operator in the philosophy. This is a virtual operator, and that the virtual is it's like it's an entirely different category, this generic virtual category. And I have some notes on it. I'm gonna post in the chat that have to do with this. And then Joevenn, can you formulate this problem for Anne-Françoise so she can respond to it as well? And I will look this up really quick.
Do you want to type your question in so that Anne-Françoise can follow? I'll type it as well, but
I mean, so just off of a slight, this is like the notes that I have that I could reach to quickly on this. But I think when we're talking about that, you're talking about like it's just like a scalar multiplier in the vector space, where the virtual exists by being able to translate between scales from local global, these scales, and by yeah, and then to see the n-dimensional and the quantic kind of point of view, or the quantum point of view, as being all perspectives or multiple perspectives at once, right? Which is like the end silhouette thing I wrote at the end. I mean, it's somewhere in there, right? I mean, I'm not exactly sure the exact question that you asked, because it was it's lost on me now after all of the response, but did it help at all?
No.
Yeah,
sure.
no, very helpful.
For Poincaré, geometry is conventional, and it is an infinite number of geometries.
Yeah.
He proved this with a bijection with theory of group of Lie.
And the end
of Lie.
and I believe go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. I'm muting myself.
Yes.
So
And the idea of Poincaré is that science is generalization, not so abstraction. Abstraction is a convention. But we have a lot of stage to have a scientific description. We can say it's his example. We can say it's the night, it is obscure. But this is the common sense consideration. But in science, we said it is obscure because the relative movement of planets. And so there is a jump between crude facts and scientific facts. But Poincaré was not, do not agree the idea of absolute space. He wrote an article who was near a scandal. He wrote in the astronomical journal, "Does the Earth turn? La Terre tourne-t-elle?" The man of église, comment est-ce qu'on dit église? Les curés was very religious. Church, wait, the church are very happy after this article. And the scientist was very, it is possible that Poincaré said this. But the signification of this is that the idea of the Earth is turning is exactly the same to said that it is common to think that the Earth is turning.
that's the sense of it being a convention.
Yes, it is an idea of the multiplicity of possible interpretation. We cannot say immediately that the Earth is turning. Even it is common to say the Earth is turning.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
in Congress in the Congress in Genf en 1900, 19, Russell present an idea of absolute space, and Poincaré was very il était très en colère, very and he cannot consider absolute movement and an absolute rest. But the problem is quite difficult because in his theory of relativity theory, he put there are some electron in rest. And this is a problem. So Einstein resolves this by principles, not by generalization. Yes, a generalization of the laws of Maxwell, but not a generalization from experiences. And the generic space of Poincaré permit to pass from one aspect to another aspect. It is as his philosophy as is an algebraic topology to distinct the disciplines. And we can move to one discipline to another. This is very interesting. And it was not understood in France in this time. It was a Russian scientists who use these ideas of Poincaré first, Kolmogorov and company. It is very interesting.
Thank you.
I guess on one other note, that's like what a lot of things that she was discussing, plus it deals with the Poincaré theses is the end body problem, which I put. I mean, we know that the contemporary end body problem, you know, it can be solved, right? And it has something like, I think recently there are over 12,000 solutions. It's completely underdetermined. It can never be, it can be solved, but infinitely. There are infinite solutions for such a thing, right? So this is like the huge problem that he was also discussing. As like at any point in time, you can predict the planets, but you could never give a final position. The only solutions to this problem are closed form, closed form and the fact that they follow the same path, which is never actually determined, that they will always the gravity will never give way and make them move on their path. So I mean, like, it has to be it's a very reductive problem when it's solved. That's the underdetermination of such things. And I think then with that epistemic kind of change in science, that then becomes looked at by disciplinary boundaries, right? In which disciplinary boundaries are the determination of knowledge. And if we can know that if we kind of have this fundamental understanding of the this underdetermination, then we can underdetermine each discipline. That's where the translations happen, right? So and that's why it's always why the metaphor is always like a lowering. If you hear, there's a very cryptic language sometimes that Laurel uses when he's in English, is when he talks about lowering or the basement or these things. Anyways.
Poincaré was skeptic on theories, but he think there are disciplines.
Yeah.
And he created only two theories, the theory of relativity and the tide theory. Only two. And he thinks that generalization more general is not a good science. So he was skeptic as Berkeley, but I think it is more near than for Leibniz. He wrote a postface to the edition of monadology of the edition of Émile Boutroux. Émile Boutroux was the stepbrother of Poincaré. Boutroux' spouse was the soror of Poincaré. And Poincaré made an extraordinary postface to understand how Leibniz creates the idea of harmony, pre-established harmony. And the reason is that Leibniz did not think that motion is conservative, but it is MV carré who is conservative. So when we take the racine, we have plus or minus in choice. So it is the harmony. It's impossible with Descartes.
I think we need to try. We started 10 minutes late, so I'm gonna assume that whoever can stay will stay. Who cannot stay past 10 minutes, let's if you want to share your fiction that you, or your experiment that you tried with us, let's have a discussion about that. That would be really nice. So
have you wrote a fiction?
Zane, do you want to go then? So just in case, so we can make sure that you can respond, we can respond to you and everything. And
sure. Do you want me to read it out? Is that?
You can read it out, you can share it, and just you can describe it, you can read it out directly, you can do it whatever way you want.
It's pretty short, it's only a page, so I'll read it, and it's in the fictions folder if people find it easier to follow along. I've got no idea if it's a good fiction or if there's such thing as a good fiction, but it's what happened in an hour on Wednesday. So
would you share your screen?
It's in
you want?
It's in the Google Drive, Joevenn.
I know, but if you could put it up.
He
so
can't.
Yeah.
My bad.
Okay.
okay, yeah.
Now we can.
Cool. I'll do that. Do that now. Fiction. Can you see that?
Yes, that's very good.
Cool. So the title is Withdrawing from the World. So I'll just zoom in a tiny bit. How many ways are there to withdraw from the world? There's the abstraction of philosophy, the withdrawal of the world into universals. This is part of the arsenal of the critique of philosophy by itself or from itself. Philosophers are always claiming that others have forgotten the world or withdrawn from it. Bergson claimed this of those who would carve up time into discrete moments and said they were turning away from the novelty of the world. Deleuze argues that a whole number of thinkers pay attention to identity over difference, and in doing so, forget the singularity of the world. But what if we suppose, as Laurel does, the unilaterality of the world? That is, we withdraw any relation to the world, and in doing so, leave behind a distinction between the world for me and the world as it is. There is only the world as it is. This is a radical notion for philosophy because it's no longer a matter of attempting a description of the absolute and of getting close to the world in order to do so. Blanchot talks about the space of literature. It's the distance of the work or of literature with respect not only to every other object which exists, but with respect to itself. The work is remote from itself or not quite itself. It's precisely this distance that opens up the work to meanings that are not exhausted by history, but can be found again and again. In other words, it's the space of literature that orients the world. Sorry, it's the space of literature that orientates towards the world. In this case, distance or withdrawal actually brings us closer to the world. So for Blanchot, the work begins in solitude, that is, with the presence of absence. Again, this is a distance, this time of the writer from the work, such that what is written becomes impersonal. As such, there's an autonomy to the work, a separation that prevents it from being read by its writer. That's why Blanchot says writers often keep journals. These are distinct from their works because they chart this succession of time rather than creation, which is timeless. One can withdraw from the world then in the act of creation, which seems contradictory, but the forcing of the image of creation is thought as timeless by lots of thinkers, not just Blanchot, but Nietzsche, Deleuze, Bachelard. Aristotle is described as having dipped his pen in thought. Sorry, that should say having dipped his pen in the world. But it's not that thought is correlated with the act of writing, but that the world is an animating force. So we must start from the world, participate in it, even if it's closed to us. So thought can withdraw by turning away from cognition, from synthesis and sense-making. This is what the principle or theory of unilaterality demands, because it precludes all relation and access to thought, but it also demands that we not attempt to rationalize this turn away or rationalize what we turn away from. It's not a matter of getting closer to the world or installing oneself within it, but rather of the necessary solitude in which thought participates in the world.
Is the world abstract or concrete here? It switches.
I'm using the world essentially as a stand-in for the concrete, or for the real. So I guess the central question is, I guess, should we conceive thought as something that needs to get close to the real in order to make sense of it, or can there be forms of thought that come from the opposite, from turning away from the world? And I guess that's represented here in terms of Blanchot discussing literature, the creation of literature, starting from a kind of void or distance. And I think creation as well as a concept is often thought of in terms of being outside of time. And so I was basically trying to consider whether that way of theorizing thought or creation is a kind of turning away from the world. So two different models basically of thought. I don't know if the encounter is that clear there, but
I think the encounter here, I mean, if I'm to interpret your work here immediately, the encounter is the encounter with the real. And then you're, in a generic way, you're considering the spatiality. You do bring up time a few times, but it seems like when you do, it's alluding to another concept, creation. but when you're talking about the world, you're consistently talking about directionality, space in the spatial representation, which is interesting because if you plotted these things, they would clusterize in space at different and or that's like a 2D dimension, but you can think of them as the superposition of both directions, right? In the same way that a quantum bit or whatever, a qubit is both, it has a spin, right? The spin is both positive and negative. You have the turning away and the turning towards.
Mm.
And then your third here is the Laurel position, I think. And that's where you're that's yeah, that's I think that's the part that we need to I need to look into to read a little bit about read a little bit more, but it's good. It's what's good about it is the way that you I think the way, for one, you ask the impossible, a sort of impossible question, right? And you're finding it throughout the history of philosophy, and then you're encountering these different ones, and it isn't in the act of the reading of the process that you're making these relations that maybe never had been made or would not be made. That's or things like that. It's like the practice of it, I guess, as just a comment. I don't know if that made sense to you to try to think of those things, and then but by writing this fiction, you're holding them in tension. You're not saying Deleuze deletes Blanchot, right? Deleuze is right. There is no right. That's the whole multiplicity of the right of philosophy. So I think, yeah, it's a good example. You did what you did what I would expect for that genre. That's good.
Thank you.
Yes. I should mention this, that there are the thing I didn't mention, Bryn, last week, which I was stumbling on when you were talking about the fiction, is that there is a very systematic operators that have been created. The point of externality or exteriority or externality is being one of them. And that's like the fact that in order for Deleuze to think philosophy, right, to think thought, he took on like this occult version of integrated difference. He took on an occult version of mathematics in order to think of difference and identity. Derrida, in order to think, takes the point of an external point of the natural sciences. Laurel takes the external point of the quantum. So what happens is by taking that external point, right, you're able to, that helps to underdetermine, or in a way model your own point of, it like models your own point of view in a way. It's like taking the external, and the external acts as a model for philosophy, for the act of thinking. And that, like, so like that's a huge important thing, is to try to think of this like external point. And that really quickly, I don't want to take up too much time, but what that does, what I mean, in order to think or to always go towards the external, the underdetermination of the concept is needed in some way. So photography, when Laurel uses the photograph, right, he underdetermines the concept of the photograph by the fact that it's not a working photograph. It's now the philosophy, or it's now a model of light to think philosophy. Mm-hmm. in the same way that you develop a photo. And so one example that I always use when I'm speaking with Anne-Françoise, like thinking capitalism, like capitalism as a huge concept, but then what is capitalism without the concept of value? And then when you think of what capitalism without value, right, that's when the integrative object starts to happen. So you reform, you reconstruct this concept through different points of externality that basically fill that hole. So you need a new model from some other way that kind of, in a way, fills the void of value that reconstructs capitalism.
I think that we lost them.
Thank you. Move to Bryn.
Yeah, I don't have permission to share my screen, but it's in the drive if someone else wanted to share their screen.
I made all participants able to share the screen.
Oh, yeah.
Try it.
Oh, nice.
Here we are.
There you go.
Hacking the Zoom.
Yeah, I took a much more literal approach to this. I was trying to think through sort of the lens of science fiction and construct a sort of being through sort of material conditions of a specific world. I was interested in a sort of like lack of interiority and what that might entail in terms of like a potential sort of release from existing ideas of sort of general binarisms. So I just laid out the sort of physical, geographical qualities of a planet and created a sort of like Klein bottle shaped being that would exist there. So I guess I could read it as well. This will be a fiction about the experience of a being that doesn't exist all at once and has no exterior or interior. They are hydrophilic and hydrophobic, non-mereological beings. Their flesh is like the petals of a flower, but one that is sturdier than we are used to. It has infinite surface area, a Sierpinski body made of feather-like structures of silicone. The planet on which they live is new relatively and is experiencing a Precambrian style burst. The planet is low mass, has light gravity, and has no moon. The planet has a robust rain system that circles the globe in whorls. It is close to the sun and has a lot of water on its surface. These creatures exist in clusters socially rather than tribes. They are mostly evenly distributed. They have a tropism toward rain to orient their bodies in the direction from which the rain is falling. Because of this, they are also affected by wind. They do not need shelter. This relieves them of delineating public and private space. When rain is light, they exist in cup state. When rain is heavy, they exist in funnel state. This is in order to modulate the amount of water they carry and therefore their weight. The language that they speak is embedded with intonations of existence. They refer to themselves as a correlate of they and to each other as a correlate of we. Because they do not exist all at once, they think of their species as immortal. Gatherings occur slowly, focused around fluxes in rain and popularity of conversational topics. And the plot of this story would be the slow migration towards the birth of a new concept.
Very cool. Like this one, like this is an interesting, I mean, even in the superposition and the way that you're kind of like overlaying the model, like the Kleinian model it acts as your like as your I think as like the model that you're using, and then I like the genre of the form of the proof. This is like a proof.
Yeah,
it's really cool. Like they follow a lot. It's really good for all of the steps in which we were trying to explicate in the last session too, like in the fact that the way things work by relation, by in through series, and I mean the collectivization of it, and the impossibility of the object. It's really good. I like it. I think it's not so as literal as you think. Maybe it's very literal in the form of the proof, but adding the Kleinian model, I think, and then in the performance of reading it, I don't know. It takes on a form of like weird fiction, which I think is what you're kind of setting up. It reminds me of Alienation. Have you read Alienation?
yes, yeah.
So, I mean, it's one thing I actually was going to talk about, but I will open it up to anybody else in my group that wants to respond. I think, and would, I thought she was typing. But I like in the form of, yeah, she did. In the form of, oh, I lost it because I was reading. I'm sorry. Go. Anybody want to? Anne responded to you in the chat.
Nice.
What I found interesting in the relationship between the two of these fictions so far, right, is that you have the world and the planet,
Yes.
which I think is interesting, not just conceptual. I mean,
Existence, the proof of existence.
Yep.
And the distance.
Yep.
I thought, yeah, just to say, Bryn, that the speculative element of yours I really liked, and the you know, the example that Tony gave before of what is capitalism without value, and then I'm not sure if you started with the, I don't know the name of that vase. I don't know if you started with that or something else, but the kind of speculative element of the fiction was really interesting.
Yeah,
I would say that. Oh,
sort
go
of
ahead.
start with the Klein bottle as a sort of way of getting around interiority.
Yeah, like a diagram, and like the Foucauldian set, like it became the form of the way of thinking about it, right? Gave you, but also the visualization helps. But like, what's good about this, I think, though, is that the two fictions. I don't know. Do we have? I haven't heard from anybody else, so I'm just thinking your two are the ones here. So, but like, we have your two fictions, and they have already overlaps. They're already thinking. We have this idea, and what we're going to want to think next, I think, I want to talk a little bit about what I was thinking for fiction, if we can stay. I know Zane has to leave, but just say this quickly. We provided the form of the matrix, right? And you see how the matrix has these different positions. So now what we're going to want to try to do collectively is we're going to do individually, and then we're going to integrate them into one model at the end. Is think about think about your fiction in relation to the others. So and then what you need to do is then in the same way that Anne-Françoise was able to think of these sort of like generic categories, you can see the generic categories. Try to think of the ones that specifically the two of you are bringing up now in terms of abstract and concrete, and see where both your work lacks and where the other one might fill in. And so what you want to do then as a practice is to try to then think of, now we're going to try to think of this integrated version of both of these. So now you're Bryn, for instance, you're going to want to think about the relationship to space with this object, maybe the spatial relation. This is an example just off of like what we're talking about. And saying you might want to be thinking about the actual existence of the world, or maybe something in like this remote. This is just an example from just like what we're going. And also you can consider Anne-Françoise matrix as the starting point. So if you want to start to use some of these concepts, if you want to use it exactly, and that would be like the next thing that we want to share. So if you can create these fictions, then we're going to want to see how we can then relate these fictions and superposition them. I mean, if we could think of it visually, it would be like you have the Kleinian, you already have Bryn, you already have a superposition of two fictions, and then think of like then Zane's text there, where does the things stand out, things like this. Yeah, so that way we can start to integrate this the matrix form. And I'm trying to do some wrap ups real quick because I know I have to leave. I will provide that text on Utopia, and I will we'll post the matrix and maybe give you some reference to it. Is that sort of clear what we want to try to experiment with for the next time?
And
Okay.
I think Tony will give an email like writing about the fiction assignment.
Yeah, I'll try to reframe it.
Yeah.
On a practical point, for readings for next week, I think they were shared in good time this week. I think it was a Wednesday, but I tend to squeeze my reading in after work on the weekday. So if it could be any earlier, that'd be great, because it kind of gives me a bit of a chance to. I can't
Okay.
more than
Sounds
that.
good. Yeah. Sorry,
No
it's
problem.
a bit late.
No, not at all. But yeah, thank you.
This all works. It works as long as you keep giving us the feedback. We work with you.
Yeah.
We do. Everybody's on a different time zone almost, I think, in this room right now. So that becomes odd management. Let me just point to both of my examples were brought up already today. I wanted to talk about the 3-body problem, and I wanted to talk about the tower and Annihilation, because the tower, if anybody has not read the Annihilation book, it's like in the first 20 or 30 pages. Okay, you have the general. Let me just tell you really quickly. You have generic disciplines going to area X, this place in California.
The
You have the
Ted
bio.
Shannon book?
No, the Vandermeer book, Annihilation.
Yeah. Okay.
So you have the biologist, you have the psychologist, you have the archaeologist, you have all these generic disciplines, right? They go to area X, almost as if they are trying to create a fiction about Anne-Françoise' work. But they experience this. Everybody is trying to map this weird space of area X, given their discipline. So the biologist is really focused on certain biological changes, and the psychologist creates this conceptual mental map. And in the book, they're trying to look at these two positions that kind of are opposites of each other. You have the lighthouse and the tower, or the tunnel. They don't know what it is. The lighthouse is completely measurable, fits on all the maps of all of the disciplines, and completely grounds them. And a lot, but the tunnel, or the tower is like an inverted tunnel. So it's a tunnel that doesn't have height. It's actually going in depth. So and they have no measurements for this. Completely defies all measurements. It's like a situation in which the integrative object and that methodology would have been really nice for this group.
Yes.
But instead they devolve into madness, and that's the beginning of this book. So that's the moral of the story. Without this method, you will become mad. But no, it's a really, really great example of this whole thing. And this, even a physical object that they're inside, that they're exploring, they can't even measure, right? So that's where I started thinking about mine, which is like a model without measurement.
Mhm.
So a model that has, or without classical form of measurement. So you look into quantum models and things like this. But when you start to think about how do I build a model without for instance, in generative models, it's based on optimization. You optimize an algorithm. Most computers, right? Every program is an optimization problem. Well, if you have no measurement of that,
Yes.
how does that work? So I began thinking about this type of model, and that's sort of what I've been trying to kind of approach. Yeah, but those, yeah. Okay, so I think I've said enough. I'm done. Joevenn?
Thanks for being here. I hope everybody had a good time.
Yeah, I was good, man. I liked it. It was very good.
Thanks for moderating.
And
We appreciate it.